So, I've got something very personal and perhaps very relatable to share with our listeners today on Disruptarian Radio. It's about truth, integrity, and, well, fatherhood.
Oh my goodness, Ryan. I've been really looking forward to this conversation because, these themes just touch on something so fundamentally human, don't they?
They absolutely do. And for me personally, this comes from a place of real experience. I actually wrote a book about it, exploring these themes in my own journey as a father.
I mean, when you first mentioned this topic to me, I was just, you know what I mean? I was immediately drawn in because, these are such universal struggles. And especially in today's world where truth seems to be, such a complicated concept.
That's exactly right. And what really prompted me to dive into this was seeing how these three elements, truth, integrity, and fatherhood, they're all so deeply interconnected. You can't really have one without the others.
Right. And I think what's really fascinating is how these themes sort of play out in real life, in actual relationships and, actual families. Because it's one thing to talk about truth and integrity in theory, but it's something completely different when you're living it.
There's this old saying that the truth will set you free, but what people don't really talk about is the cost of that freedom. In my experience, telling the truth, it can cost you relationships, comfort, and sometimes even your reputation.
Oh my goodness, yes. And when you're talking about these costs, I imagine they're not just, theoretical. These are things you've actually experienced, right?
Absolutely. I mean, growing up, I was born into a family where truth was optional, and I was definitely born into a world where it was inconvenient. While both of my parents seemed to leverage their life based on mistruth and perhaps lies, it defined my path where I refused to play those games. Truth was life for me. My father, he was a hard worker, but there was always this weight following him from his previous marriage.
That must have been really difficult to navigate as a child. How did that shape your understanding of truth and integrity?
Well, the thing is, my mother was very young when she married my father, and she carried her own wounds from a childhood that never really gave her much stability. So I was essentially born into this storm, if you will.
And did you find yourself having to adapt to survive in that environment? Because that sounds incredibly challenging for a young person.
From as early as I can remember, survival meant learning when to speak up and when to stay quiet. But here's the thing that really stuck with me. My father, despite all his faults, he had this incredibly strong sense of duty. Even when he lost everything, his job, his home, his pride, he never ever turned his back on us.
That's really powerful. And it actually reminds me of conversations I've had with people about how truth sometimes feels like this, almost impossible standard to live up to.
And that's exactly why it matters so much. My father had a strong sense of pride and didn't always reveal the truth to us, mostly to shelter us, I think. And also because my mother wanted to live in a reality that was much different than the truth of the matter. But my dad had good intentions, and I know that he loved us very much.
So this sort of deception and living in a false reality shaped your course in a way that living your truth and being honest about it was extremely important. Is that what you are saying?
Precisely, because without truth there is no real integrity, and without integrity, a man, especially a father, is just, well, he's just a shadow of what he should be. You see, integrity, it's not something you can just, pick up at the store, right? I've learned through some really tough experiences that it's earned through fire, through standing by what you believe in, even when it costs you everything.
And I imagine, you've had to pay that price yourself, haven't you?
More times than I can count, honestly. I've lost friendships, relationships, and even access to my own child because I refused to play the game of deception. The world, it's funny how it doesn't always welcome people who tell the truth, especially when that truth makes others uncomfortable.
That's absolutely devastating, Ryan. And I'm really struck by what you're saying about how being honest has actually been used against you. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, here's the thing. I've never hidden my past. Back in 2002, I wrote this autobiography where I laid everything out. Not to glorify my mistakes, but to make them a lesson, But somehow that honesty, it got weaponized against me. My story, This Ragged Life Renewed, is still on the Internet Archive. It is a bold, unapologetic view into the life that I lived growing up, and the transformation that occurred in my life when I found Jesus as a personal mentor through the writings inspired by his life in the Bible. But all of these years later, my early years are still used against me in an attempt to lower my integrity or my dedication to veracity somehow.
That's really messed up. Like, how does someone even begin to process that kind of betrayal?
The hardest part is seeing how people twist your past. They take your honesty, your willingness to acknowledge mistakes, and they use it as proof that you haven't changed. It's like they're saying a man who owns up to his past is somehow worse than someone who buries it under lies.
And this affects your relationship with your daughter, doesn't it?
Every single day. You see, I want my daughter to know that her father, he wasn't afraid to admit when he was wrong, that I fought for honesty, even when it hurt, that no matter what lies have been told about me, I've never ever stopped trying to be in her life.
It sounds like, integrity for you isn't just about personal pride, it's about something much bigger.
Exactly. It's about responsibility, about legacy, and most importantly, it's about fatherhood. Because at the end of the day, what kind of example would I be setting if I chose the easy lie over the hard truth? So here's where things get really heavy. If there's one battle I never expected to fight in my life, it's the battle for my own child. You think being a father is straightforward, right? But for some of us, it's literally a war.
And this is something that's affecting so many fathers out there, isn't it? The whole system seems, like it's working against them sometimes.
That's exactly it. Parental alienation is, well, it's devastating, and it's not just about one parent keeping a child away. It's about completely erasing that parent from the child's life, from their history. I've had to fight tooth and nail just for the right to be acknowledged as my daughter's father.
God, that must be absolutely crushing. And what kind of obstacles do you face when you're trying to maintain that relationship?
Every move gets scrutinized, every intention questioned. My character has been, attack doesn't even begin to cover it. And the hardest part, the thing that really keeps me up at night, is knowing that my daughter is growing up with this version of me that isn't real.
That's heartbreaking, Ryan. And do you find this is a common experience for other fathers you've spoken to?
More common than most people realize. The system, it often favors whoever tells the best lie. I've met countless fathers who are going through the exact same thing. They're good men trying their best to be present in their children's lives, but they're fighting against this narrative that's already been written about them.
And what keeps you going through all of this? How do you maintain that strength to keep fighting?
Because one day my daughter will want answers, real answers. Not the stories she's been told, but the truth. And when that day comes, I need to be ready. I need to have stood my ground, maintained my integrity, so I can look her in the eye and tell her that her father never gave up.
That's really powerful. And for other fathers out there facing similar battles, what would you say to them?
Stand your ground, document everything. And most importantly, never ever give up. Because our children deserve to know the truth, even if it takes years for them to find it. Speaking of truth and transformation, I've walked a pretty rough road to get where I am today. And when I say rough, I mean, there were times I wasn't sure I'd make it through.
Can you tell us more about that journey? What was the turning point for you?
I remember lying there in rehab, just staring at the ceiling, wondering if life had anything left for me. That's rock bottom, when you're just completely stripped of everything.
God, that must have been absolutely terrifying. And how did you start rebuilding from there?
The thing about redemption is, it's not like the movies. People don't cheer you on. Sometimes they actually hold your past against you like it's a weapon. I wrote about all of this in my autobiography back in 2002, being completely honest about my mistakes.
And was that scary? Putting all of that out there, knowing people might use it against you?
The irony is, that's exactly what happened. The very things I confessed to help others learn from my mistakes. They've been twisted and used against me in court, like somehow being honest about your past means you haven't changed.
That's mad, isn't it? Like, surely acknowledging your mistakes should be seen as a positive thing.
You'd think so, right? But becoming a father, that gave the whole journey new meaning. It wasn't just about proving something to myself anymore. It was about, being someone my child could look up to. Someone who lives in truth, even when it hurts.
And how has that influenced your approach to fatherhood? Your commitment to staying honest?
Every single day I make a choice. The road to redemption, it's not a destination. It's a daily commitment to doing better, being better. And sometimes that means standing alone. But I'd rather stand alone in truth than be accepted for living a lie.
That's really profound, Ryan. And do you feel like that journey of transformation is ever really complete?
The thing is, as long as we're breathing, we're transforming. Every day is another chance to choose integrity over convenience, truth over comfort, and being a father, that's the greatest motivation to keep making the right choices, even when they're the hardest ones. When we talk about truth, especially in family relationships, it's like a double-edged sword. I've learned that, sometimes the truth can cut both ways.
Like, how do you mean exactly? In terms of your own experience?
The thing is, telling the truth has cost me so much. Relationships, opportunities, and even time with my own child. But at the same time, it's the only thing that lets me sleep at night.
God, that must be absolutely heart-wrenching. And how do you deal with that contradiction? Like knowing the truth is right, but seeing it cause so much pain.
It's probably the hardest part of this whole journey. You see, when people don't want to hear the truth, they'll do anything to bury it. In my case, they've taken my honesty about my past and, twisted it into something unrecognizable.
That's just devastating. And how does that affect your relationship with your daughter?
The painful reality is that she's growing up with this version of me that isn't real. Someone else's narrative about who I am. And that's what hurts the most. Knowing that the very truth I'm trying to protect is being used to keep us apart.
And do you ever feel tempted to just play along? To make things easier?
The thing about truth is, it doesn't die. No matter how many lies are told, no matter how hard people try to bury it, it always finds its way to the surface. And that's what I hold on to. One day my daughter will have questions, and when that day comes, I want to be able to look her in the eye and tell her I never stopped being honest.
That takes such incredible strength, Like standing by the truth even when it's causing you pain.
Sometimes, the only thing harder than telling the truth is living with a lie. And as a father, I have to think about the example I'm setting. What would it teach my daughter if I chose comfort over honesty? If I compromised my integrity just to make things easier?
And, do you think she'll understand that someday?
That's my hope. Every time I choose truth over convenience, I'm betting on my daughter's future ability to see through the lies. Because at the end of the day, that's what real parenting is about. Not just protecting our kids, but teaching them to value truth, even when it hurts. So, when we talk about being a good father today, it's so much more complicated than what most people think. It's not just about providing anymore or being there for the weekend football games.
Right, and what do you think are the biggest challenges fathers face today? Especially in terms of, staying present.
The biggest challenge is, the system itself. Society still has this outdated view of fathers as somehow less essential to a child's development. And when you're fighting against that mindset, it can be absolutely exhausting.
God, that must be incredibly frustrating. And how do you think that affects fathers who are trying their absolute best to stay involved?
The thing is, many fathers are fighting battles on multiple fronts. They're dealing with court systems that often seem biased against them, workplace cultures that don't always understand their parenting responsibilities, and sometimes, unfortunately, ex-partners who use access to children as a form of control.
That's just, it sounds absolutely overwhelming. How do fathers maintain their presence despite all these obstacles?
It takes incredible determination. You have to be willing to, well, show up even when doors are being closed in your face. Some fathers, they drive hours just for a chance at a 30-minute visit. Others maintain detailed records of every attempt at contact, every message sent, every call made.
And what about the emotional toll? Like, how do fathers cope with that constant struggle?
That's actually the hardest part. Managing the emotional weight while still trying to be the stable, loving presence your child needs. Even when you're hurting, even when you're angry at the situation, you have to put that aside when you get those precious moments with your child.
Do you find that fathers, support each other through these challenges?
More and more, yes. There's this growing community of fathers who understand what it's like to fight these battles. Support groups, online forums, even advocacy organizations. The thing is, when you're going through something this difficult, knowing you're not alone can make all the difference. When I was with my first wife and we started growing apart, when I was asked for divorce, my ex-wife would threaten me on multiple levels. The worst threat was, if you leave me, I will turn your children against you and they won't want to be in your life. A threat that she followed up with. However, in 2015, which was 5 years before we got divorced, I started a group on Facebook called Actions Against Parental Alienation, and I started talking with other fathers about this issue. Most of them recommended document everything, which I did. I have the ex-wife recorded threatening me with, "If you divorce me, I will make sure to turn the kids against you." And I also have the therapy session with the kids, directly after the divorce, after my ex-wife's first turn alone with them, telling the therapist, "It seems like Mom wants us to choose sides, and she is always saying horrible things about Dad to us." Just like I expected. I just hope that someday the children see through what has gone on.
And what would you say to fathers who are just starting to face these challenges?
The most important thing is to never let the obstacles define your relationship with your child. Document everything, know your rights, but most importantly, keep showing up. Because your presence, even if it's just through letters or messages that might not get responses, it matters. It creates a record of love that can't be erased. If you need support, you can also join us at Actions Against Parental Alienation on Facebook. When I think about legacy, I'm reminded that it's not just about what we leave behind financially or materially. It's about the emotional inheritance we pass down to our children.
God, yes, and how do you see that playing out specifically with truth and integrity?
The thing is, I want my daughter to inherit something more valuable than any physical possession. I want her to know that she comes from a father who stood by his convictions, even when it was incredibly difficult. Even when it cost him everything.
That's so powerful. And how do you hope this legacy of truth will impact her life going forward?
My deepest hope is that she'll understand that integrity isn't just some abstract concept. It's about making hard choices every day. I want her to see that being honest, even when it hurts, even when it's inconvenient. That's what builds real character.
Right, and do you think about how she might process all of this when she's older?
Every single day, I'm building this archive of truth, you could say. Every decision I make, every battle I fight, it's all part of a story that I hope will help her understand someday. The thing is, when she's ready to ask questions, I want her to find answers that are real, that are honest.
And what gives you hope for the future? What keeps you going through all of this?
I hold on to this unshakable belief that truth eventually finds its way to the surface. Lies might work in the short term, but truth has this way of emerging when it needs to. And when that day comes, I'll be here, ready to help my daughter understand her story, our story. Looking back at everything we've discussed today, I think the biggest takeaway is that being a father, it's not about being perfect. It's about being persistent, being honest, and most importantly, being there.
And through all these challenges you faced, What would you say to other fathers who might be going through similar situations right now?
The thing is, I would tell them to keep going, even when it feels impossible, even when the system seems stacked against you, because your children need to know that you never stopped fighting for them.
God, yes, and it's about playing the long game, isn't it?
Exactly. You know, truth and integrity, they're not quick fixes. They're foundations you build over time. And sometimes it takes years for that foundation to really show its strength.
And for our Disruptarian radio listeners who might be struggling with their own battles for truth and integrity, what's your final message?
I'd say, remember that you're not alone in this fight. The road might be long and it might be incredibly difficult at times, but standing in your truth, maintaining your integrity, that's how we create real change, not just for ourselves, but for our children and their future.
That's just so beautifully put, Ryan. Thank you for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you, Sarsa, for helping me unpack all of this. You know, sometimes the hardest conversations are the ones we need to have the most.
Thank you for joining us today on Disruptarian Radio. Our virtual voice actor helped Ryan with his release of his new ebook titled Truth, Integrity, and Fatherhood, A Life Examined, which you can read at emeraldsun.net, and it will soon be available at all major ebook outlets as well. This has been incredibly difficult for Ryan to deal with, and he is not alone. Men commit suicide successfully 4 times as much as women. Most men who kill themselves are dealing with a custody situation with their children. So these stories and support groups are important to men, and we are grateful to be able to bring this to you today.